Let's talk about the Space Jam, right? You guys seen the original movie, by the way, it was so much better than the sequel. No contest there,
Is,
but
is
I've got the
anybody
re
fighting for the LeBron Space Jam? Anybody out
Oh,
there?
it's awful. It's just like, welcome to the Space Jam. So, what are we talking about here? Humankind has launched more than 13,000 satellites into Earth's orbit since 1957 at the beginning of the space age. Of those, 9,000 still remain. They collide, they break up, they create major debris. And why do you care? Because these objects often travel faster than a speeding bullet at more than 22,300 miles per hour. A little piece of space debris the size of a BB could actually pierce your position, navigation, timing satellite and knock out GPS. Okay, so very, very significant why we care about space junk. And what the last thing I saw was there's either 900,000 or a million pieces of space junk that are currently passing over our heads every single day. And those are including from government abandoned satellites. So this article talks about how the FCC has just created a rule that requires basically removing space junk within 5 years. Removing defunct satellites within 5 years of when they are no longer in commission. Why do you care? This is a really interesting, weird regulatory issue where you're now starting to see some almost like who's got the authority here, right? So when you think about commercial space, the FCC grants licenses, right? NASA, of course, has a huge role in space. And everybody's like, wait a minute, who's on first? Who actually should be issuing these rules? And Congress got a little, frankly, ticked off that the FCC unilaterally issued this rule. And it's not the first time. I just wrote an article about this. Google Dawn's Old Eye Space Jam Inside GNSS, and you'll find it. But the Congress has put out this, they're calling the Orbits Act, the brain, mouth. The Orbital Sustainability Act, the Orbits Act. And what it's doing is saying NASA, Commerce, National Space Council need to first publish a list of debris that pose the greatest risk to orbiting spacecraft. NASA needs to establish a program of debris removal because that technology, there's a whole, and by the way, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there's the interesting thing about space is space law is governed primarily by treaty. And under the treaty, the question is even who, it's really the nation state that put that satellite up there that has the responsibility to remove it. So, in our own country, you see this infighting between the FCC, Congress, NASA, lots of issues, but it's such a critical issue. And
yeah, and the implications are heavy, right? So now your cost of your satellite has to take into account that it needs to be removed if that becomes law. So how much does that cost in the actual launch and recovery of that satellite? Probably a lot. And then, who are the players that can do that? I mean, is the two major trash companies on the planet, Waste Management and a couple of those, going to start getting to the space trash business with aligning with companies that understand the market value that's in there? So I think a lot of things to think about.
Yeah, so I'll admit that I have no background in space junk. Okay, but I read this as a total layperson. I was going through and I was surprised by two things. The first, Dawn, is the one that you've already alluded to, is the fact that there's this jurisdictional battle. Because I was quite surprised to see the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, weighing in on the physical results of space debris out there. It just seemed kind of odd to me. And then, of course, NASA coming back saying, we think we might be a better entity to address this, or at least members of Congress saying that we think NASA might be better to address that. That would certainly be my instinct as an outsider here. But the second piece was more interesting to me. It was the substance, the actual, what is this 5-year rule really necessary or right? And NASA's position, what I saw, said, we don't think you need to have a 5-year rule. We think under most circumstances, the traditional 25-year rule is totally sufficient to provide the safety and security that we need. And so it seems to me like there needs to be some more research into this to figure out before you spend a lot of extra money in increasing the requirements on companies. As Tim said, that it's going to make it a lot more expensive to do these things that are essential to what we do as a society. You need to take a look at this.
Yeah, I think SpaceX takes theirs down within 3 months. So, again, from the technology standpoint, to Tim's point, to the cost standpoint, 5 years, 25 years, 3 months, what's that sweet spot? I don't know, but obviously someone needs to figure it out. Mike, what are you thinking?
I don't
know. Well, at least you've got we know that NASA can hit the target on a meteor when they need to. So from their testing there in the last couple of weeks. So that's a good backup plan, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sure that created a bit of space junk when you exploded. I'm just throwing that out there.
They got that way far away from the Earth, thankfully. But no, I almost wonder if this was like a purposeful move. A little bit conspiracy here to move the ladder up by making the requirement. So sometimes that's kind of backdoor dealing stuff you could see here. Because what jurisdiction to the FCC imagine that they're the person or they're the entity that actually should be handling this? Is it interfering with anything within the communications?
It could. That's the article I wrote.
What's that scenario though?
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. If it hits a couple GPS satellites out, we're going to have impact for aviation operations around the world, right? And military and commercial and all kinds of
everything.
Stuff.
Tim, look, we don't go anywhere without firing up our Waze app or Google Maps or whatever. And just imagine a life without GPS. We would just implode. Honestly, we'd be sent back to the dark ages.
A life without this show, we'd be off the air.
Yeah, I know. Heck, I couldn't even get Wi-Fi over there at the hotel.
I often say that to people when they're impatient with the internet. I'm like, let it go to space and come back. Give it a second.
It's traveling at the speed of light, so come on. That stuff's fast.
Yeah, exactly. Very good.
No, but just to take it even a little bit further, so what you're telling me is that the FCC is concerned that this is a huge threat, but NASA wasn't. What would be a normal way for them to go about expressing that concern rather than just, putting it on the books? Is there any other interagency communication on issues like this?
Yeah, there's a whole space council. There's a whole apparatus set up in our government. Well, yeah.
Space council.
Yeah, and of course, now we were just joking about it beforehand, but it's a real thing. We really have a United States Space Force. They're called Guardians. So there's so many different stakeholders at this point. It's one of those things that like Patrick just said. All of us having been in the military, me, Pat, Tim, and having been JAGs. Space law. It was very niche. It was only a very few handful until recently of people, at least in the Air Force, were getting Master of the Laws degrees in space law, maybe 2 a year. It's one of those things that not a lot of people know about, but it's one of those things that I think is so critical to all life and modern life. And also, when you think about the drone industry in particular and satellite communications, position, navigation, timing, everything we do depends on space, and it's something that most people are pretty ignorant about, even lawyers. So I feel like this is just an interesting area to keep an eye on and keep watching. I know I get a newsletter in my inbox every day called Breaking Defense, and I scanned through it this morning. I'll tell you, let's just say hypothetically 10 articles, 8 of them were about space.
I think and one thing that comes to mind of talking about the different interagencies and stakeholders that play in this realm kind of beckons back to intelligence, right? And let's look back to September 11th, and then we created this position stakeholder that supposedly is the maestro of intelligence called Director of National Intelligence.
Right.
I don't think we have that yet in space, right? So we still have a rivalry going on of who's in charge.